Good morning and welcome everyone to CPA webinar Sustainability as a Business Issue. My name is Fabiola and I work as an events and membership executive for the CPA. Today I will be helping our host Jane Thornback, CPA's Sustainability Policy Advisor, to run the webinar. At the CPA, sustainability policy has been a central priority for almost 20 years. In this webinar, Jane Thornback will speak about her role at CPA as a CPA Sustainability Policy Advisor, where she has run the Sustainability Policy Group for over 18 years. This group now has over 200 participants from amongst CPA's broad membership. Construction product manufacturers need to be aware of the rapidly changing policy and market context and assess the business challenges and opportunities this pose for their product sectors or company. In this webinar, Jane will explain how CPA aims to provide clarity for its trade associations and company members. Jane will give you a 40 minutes presentation followed by 15 minutes Q&A. Before turning the floor over to our host, I want to remind you all that this webinar will be recorded and the chat will be deactivated. However, I invite you all to type your questions in the Q&A box. We hope to post the recording on the CPA website next week. Thank you, and Jane, you can feel free to begin.
Thank you very much. Okay, so next slide, please. Right, this is the structure of my presentation. Something on CPA, sustainability, what's the issue, why the concern? Sustainability, not a new concept. Sustainability, many interpretations, which I'll explore. The key themes for construction product manufacturers and my role at CPA, the role of the CPA Sustainability Group and current priorities. And then a sort of rhetorical question of what you were doing and are you doing enough? And I will limit my boundary to environmental sustainability. Sustainability, as I'm assuming you know, is usually the three pillars of environmental, economic and social. We would be here for the rest of the year if I covered all topics, so I'm limiting my scope to environmental sustainability. So next slide, please. Thank you. Now, just to say with CPA, we are the umbrella trade association for construction products manufacturers in the UK. Although we do have European and international members. We are material and product neutral, so we do not promote any sector or company. We have 25 large company members and 41 trade associations, and there's a huge variation in what they manufacture. And this divides between those who manufacture materials such as ceramics, concrete, steel, plastics, timber, and then those who make products from those materials. So windows, flooring, roof tiles, doors, adhesives and sealants, coatings, insulation, floorings, etc. So it's a large industry worth estimated £62 billion. And we estimate, although we would never know, that there are about 24,000 companies within our membership, in terms of many of the members of trade associations are also members of ours. And over 70% of construction products used in the UK are manufactured in the UK. Everyone always gasps at that. Obviously, raw materials that make up many of those construction products may be brought in from outside of these islands, but the actual manufacture of products used in the UK is over 70%. So next slide, please. Next slide, please. Great. So let's just remind ourselves briefly. I don't know who all of you are out there, and I know most of you are either not members of CPA or are members of member trade associations. So I'm slightly in the dark as to where you are on your own sustainability journey. So I just thought I'd take a moment or two to just remind us why sustainability is going up the political and social agenda. And clearly, all of us, I think, now would agree that the systems are changing. Our weather patterns are changing. We've got droughts, fires, floods, hurricanes, sea ice melting, record temperatures being broken everywhere, every year. So quite clearly, things are changing. And is that for the better or not? And, you know, clearly it's not for the better. And these frequencies and intensities of weather changes is causing mayhem to many communities, societies, and nations. So next slide, please. And the reason for that, of course, the driver of the system change across the globe is ourselves, in terms of the number of us and our consumption and production. And I'm always reminded that my mother-in-law, who is quite elderly, when she was born, there were 2 billion people on the planet, and now there are 8 billion. So next slide, please. And of course, that many more people in the last 80 years or so has also meant using lots more resources. Many countries around the world are developing fast. They're wanting a better standard of living. They're wanting a modern standard of living. And so cities are heading for the sky with massive construction for offices, new homes, leisure. And I've used Shanghai example here. You could use Dubai, Singapore, Jakarta, Kuala Lumpur, Sao Paulo, Rio, wherever. So lots more of us, lots more resources. Next slide, please. And of course, all of that is that modern living is dependent on high carbon lifestyles. That is the energy that has fueled the development so far. Next slide, please. And of course, all of that is causing alarm across the United Nations, across national governments, across the European Union, civil society, media, high-profile people such as the lovely David Attenborough, and of course religious leaders as well. I've shown the Pope here, but there's general alarm at these changes and a need for response. Next slide, please. And of course that clamour is growing louder every day from all parts of society. Remember Insulate Britain? Taken over, the Just Stop Oil has taken over from them. We have the investor community looking at their role to align climate targets with science. We have the insurance industry, which obviously is massively affected by these once in a century events that are now happening every other year. And in lots of groups, such as the architects, the surveyors, the whoever they are, have been declaring emergencies. They felt they needed to raise the profile within their sector of the need to do something about it. So next slide, please. So we've got the problem. We've got lots of people from government, business, society talking about these things. But I find that there are many interpretations of sustainability. And quite often when people are talking about these topics, they might be using the same word, but they're actually meaning different things. And it's quite interesting sometimes to have possibly even a conversation of 30 minutes or so before you suddenly realize that you're talking not about the same thing, and different people have different interpretations of what they mean. by sustainability. So I just divided sort of into different possible groupings. Other people could do it a different way. But if we look at a common view of what sustainability is if you ask your marketing or communications department to give you some image on sustainability, I can almost guarantee that it will come back as having images of leaves, of forests, and be coloured green. And there may be a few recycling bins for good measure added, but it's largely leaves and forests. And I now have a standing request in our office that anything that comes back to me will have no leaves. So bear that in mind when you're talking to your comms and marketing department. Is that the message you're doing? This assumption of leaves and trees and possibly butterflies is possibly that sustainability is primarily about the non-built environment. So ancient woodlands, tropical forests, badgers, orangutans, that sort of thing, essentially a nature focus on species and habitats. And this implies perhaps that this interpretation of sustainability implies it's something other. So you do it if there's enough money and if there's time and if there's implication. It's an add-on. And sometimes, although this is changing fast, there certainly used to be a sense that people talking about these things were really not understanding the adult important economical things in life. And indeed, we tend to call construction projects development, whereas concern for the environment has often been described as anti-development. So you see already in that interpretation of sustainability, you see two sort of groups opposing each other. And that often the media will position sustainability in that regard. And before you all write in, I am not in any way dismissing the major concern for biodiversity, but it's just that interpretation. The next interpretation of sustainability is really a compliance one, which certainly in our manufacturing sector for really 50 to 70 years, manufacturers have been responding to increasing environmental regulation to do with largely pollution to air, water, and soil. So this obviously caused by the terrible air quality we have, the appalling state of the rivers, the impact of DDT in our agriculture, the issues of large amounts of waste. So this was the compliance angle of sustainability, and that lingers on, and many of you will have to comply with regulations, reporting, etc. And so there's often that interpretation of, okay, we need to do compliance. And I have before now been asked, what computer package do I recommend for sustainability compliance? So I get that when I'm talking to our members, there's these different interpretations. Some of you, and it often does depend on when you sort of when you started your working life, is that you were doing perhaps implementing 14,001 within your company. And this is management system. So this wasn't a regulation, but it was a voluntary system that companies wanted to differentiate themselves from their competitors by having ISO 14001. And that led to a new profession of people who would often join a big company, put in place the necessary management processes, and then job done, move to another company. And institutions like IEMA came into being to start to provide the professional institutional basis behind that sort of approach. Then more recently, one starts to see market demands, tendering, procurement demands for low carbon solutions. And we're seeing that a lot now from the clients, the large contractors, and often these declarations of commitment to decarbonising or responding to the biodiversity challenge is to do with it translates into market demands from within our sector. It is clients, contractors, etc. And that now is shifting even further on. And now for those of you who are large enough that you're attracting investors, then there is a big concern from investment companies, pension funds, other investment companies, for wanting to know whether what they're investing in is the company which says it's sustainable, is it sustainable, and how can they judge that? And there is now a whole new set of sustainability standards coming into being, which are sort of beginning to conflict or align with existing requirements on companies for carbon reporting. So we've seen this sort of evolution and change of how people interpret sustainability, and depending on when you perhaps began your working life, you will come in at a certain moment, and your assumption will be based probably on that. But now we're really arriving at a point where sustainability is not that other. It's not just compliance. It's not something just to be added to some incredibly overworked health and safety executive. It's actually now part of the business strategy. What are the costs and the benefits to you as a sector or a company, and what are the risks and opportunities? And we are in a sort of decade of major transition. So sustainability is now central to sort of surviving into the future in all meanings of that word. So that's what I find now when people ask me about sustainability or to do a presentation on it. You know, it isn't the leaves, it's not the regulations, it's now everything that you do. And if one doesn't think about these things, then some of you may be old enough to remember the transition to digital photography and the well-known example of Kodak, which was a massive global entity, and it said, oh, you know, digital photography, it'll never catch on. And I think they were bankrupt within an incredibly short space of time. And we're in that moment now with sustainability. So next slide, please. So by what I've said, which these different interpretations of sustainability almost do follow a historical perspective. And that's the other message, is as well as these different interpretations, it's not a new concept. It wasn't invented by Greta Thunberg in 2019. And some of these images on the screen, the United Nations Environment Programme was established in 1972. So that's 50 years ago. The Limits to Growth was published 50 years ago. The World Conservation Strategy, 1980. Interesting there, the word conservation, today we use that for nature. If you wrote that strategy today, it would be World Sustainability Strategy. We've had concern over biodiversity for decades. This was the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN Tropical Forest Action Plan. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which advises governments, was set up in 1988. And the Rio Earth Summit was in 1992, when the Global Conventions on Climate Change and Biodiversity were first signed. So that COP26, which a lot of people think, oh, it's the first time we're talking about this, that was the 26th meeting of the countries that had signed the International Climate Change Convention in 1992. So sustainability is not a new concept. It has lots of interpretations, and depending on your sector, your company, where you want to position yourselves, you need to be aware of those two things. So moving on, next slide, please. So within all that, and the fact that I have been around at CPA for a while now, the key themes that our CPA sustainability policy work stream looks at can be clustered into the following areas. Clearly, decarbonisation and net zero, massive accelerating, evolving agenda. Within that, sustainability measurement and reporting is a baffling miasma of competing requirements. We've got the other side of the coin of decarbonisation and net zero is resource efficiency, waste reduction, and moving towards a circular economy. Resource issues also include water. We've got either too much of it or not enough of it, or we need to manage it better. So there's another huge agenda. And then also sort of surrounding that, we've got the developing, I call them procurement asks, but the requirements from government procurement, or the requirements from different client groups, where they're asking even for you to even be on a tender document that you have done various declarations, commitments, plans, measurement, whatever it might be. So those are procurement. And then there is also a huge innovation and research framework around around decarbonisation, but including industrial decarbonisation. And I've put biodiversity here because we should be doing something, but we haven't as yet, just not enough hours in the day. So those are our key themes we look at. Next slide, please. And I'm just going to take 3 of those and just look at them in slightly more detail, because it gives you a flavour of the types of things that I discuss with our members in our sustainability policy group. So climate change, I mean, it is the hot topic. And I think within the UK, because COP26, we were the host, it did accelerate a lot of thinking in the UK. But, we have been involved with this for a very long time. So next slide, please. So if we look at the UK climate policy framework, the UK Climate Change Act was first signed in 2008. So that's whatever it is, 15 years ago. And it was, at that time, it was 80% reduction by 2050. And the 2019 amendment, which is often what people refer to as if that was the origin. No, that was the amendment which changed it from 80% to 100% by 2050. And it's that 100% that is this term net zero is the shorthand for it. And of course, there's all sorts of studies and discussion groups and interpretations of, well, what do we really mean by net zero? What is the different sectors' contribution to that? How can we decarbonize those different sectors? And to help define all that, the UK Climate Change Act set up, it established the Committee on Climate Change, and that has a mandatory responsibility to report to Parliament on the performance of the government of the day. And it produces these things called carbon budgets. And at the moment, they have the 6th carbon budget. And that defines in huge detail how we should go about trying to achieve net zero by 2050. So their work very much influences what government then puts in place as the policy framework, because government has to respond to this annual appraisal of their work. We've had the 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, which in a way that was then interpreted by different government departments, and different government departments take forward the carbon budgets So we now have the new Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, DESNET. There's the Department of Business and Trade, the former Bays Department, who do a lot in this area. DULAC, Department of Levelling Up and Homes and Communities, they're in charge of building regulations, developing the future homes and building standard, looking at what requirements they can put in there. What are we yet at stages where we can regulate embodied carbon, for instance? DEFRA deals with resource efficiency, waste management, product standards, slightly curiously, but there we go. And obviously the Department of Transport and, all importantly, Treasury. So lots of different departments work in this area, often not joined up at all, but it's improving. And then these departments produce sector decarbonisation strategies, and these define what government is going to do in terms of regulation, policies, research, incentive schemes, etc. And those relevant to ourselves in manufacturing are obviously the industrial decarbonisation strategy, the heat in building strategy, the transport decarbonisation strategy, the overriding and overwhelming issue of decarbonising energy, and then within that a hydrogen strategy and all sorts of other strategies. So there's lots of strategies that deliver action plans that then filter down, cascade down into regulations, policy initiatives, research funding. Numerous parliamentary committee reports coming out your ears. The important independent Chris Skidmore report on net zero and its relationship to growth. And then we have other things, UK emissions trading scheme, committee, climate change agreements, all sorts of things. So there's a very, very vibrant, baffling, confusing policy framework around climate. And you need to know what impact any of that might have on your business going forward. Next slide, please. And then burrowing down further, in manufacturing, this was the industrial decarbonisation strategy issued in 2021. And that is looking at the issues of what about carbon leakage if we have too much demand for energy intensive sectors in the UK to do all sorts of requirements, which we're not requiring of imports into the UK. This is called carbon leakage, carbon problems. And so there's a proposal at present for a carbon border adjustment mechanism. The EU is bringing in one shortly, and the UK is looking at what it will do. And there was some indication in the Financial Times that the Chancellor today may mention something about carbon border adjustment mechanisms. I've come to learn that it's best not to predict in those arenas. This industrial strategy is also the vehicle whereby funding for research on carbon capture, usage and storage, on the use of hydrogen in manufacturing, on alternative low carbon materials, the Royce Institute, what are they doing in this area? So that defines the budget of what comes from government. And an area that's of particular concern to us is a chapter in this, which is to do with low carbon industrial products, whatever they are. And they want to develop new product standards for these low carbon industrial products. Well, yes. What does everyone mean by all that? And they then wanted to develop these standards and have product labeling. So think washing machines, fridges, there's that concept. And they want to use public procurement to drive such change, and so to support people to make greener choices. Within that little bundle, the impact, if it goes wrong for many of you, is disastrous. And then part of this is also to do with resource efficiency and driving towards a circular economy model. Next slide, please. And then, that's just manufacturing. Obviously, if we're looking at decarbonisation in buildings and infrastructure, and these are the markets that you sell into, then there's another. And I'm not going to apologise for the death by PowerPoint here, because that is the reality of what we as sustainability professionals are dealing with. We are dealing with hundreds and hundreds, possibly thousands of different strands of initiatives and activities, which we need to be aware of what's going on and how it will impact us as window manufacturers, mineral producers, flooring companies, whatever it is. We need to be aware of this. We see with buildings, and there is the Part L revision already out there. We're expecting the Future Homes and Building Standard anytime soon, but we keep being told that. So who's to define soon? The house builders have brought together an industry consortium, the Future Homes Hub, who are looking at how they are going to be able to implement a potential Future Homes and Building Standard. So that's something we need to keep track of. There's a big push, as there should be, for whole life carbon assessment of new buildings and infrastructure, and which for manufacturers means providing EPD information. Heat in building strategy is, these 600,000 heat pumps that are going to be installed by 2028. Lots of people say, not quite sure how that's going to happen. So I'm not going to go through all these, but there are, for every different, whether it's domestic homes, retrofit, commercial, infrastructure, there are a whole load of policy issues which will impact them and therefore will impact your markets. And you need to be looking ahead to see what is happening, but also perhaps if whatever's being proposed is really quite balmy, then we need to be standing up and saying that's not going to work because da-da-da-da-da-da. Right, next slide, please. This is the investment, excuse me, and procurement people who are starting they've started their journey, and they're developing another whole new set of standards, which I think will become possibly more prominent than anything else. And the government here is looking at how these new standards would link to their existing carbon reporting mechanism. Next slide, please. So I used climate change as an example of how there's the overarching policy framework and then burrowing down to individual strands of work and different professional communities activities, and how any aspect of any of that may come out the blue and affect your markets and your industry, and you need to be alert to that. And I've alluded to the whole sustainability reporting aspect, which I'm sure many of you are tearing your hair out over. There is mass confusion out there at the present time over the relationship between company carbon reporting, scopes 1, 2, and 3, or the product lifecycle assessment reporting, which are environmental product declarations, and building project whole life carbon assessments. These are different things measuring different things via different methodologies. There is a relationship between carbon in all of these, but it's not a straightforward swap over. And there is now quite a lot of work. People have at last realized that these things are different. And so now there's a lot of work, a lot of consultancy work from government going, oh, we've realized they are different, but how are they different? And how do they align? And what do we require of companies so that they're not overburdened. So this is a massive area. I'm sure it's a major concern for lots of you. And I know depending on where you are in your sustainability journey, you're desperate for help. Next slide, please. This is another topic, same issue as before. There's lots and lots of different policies, different initiatives. Cities are very strong in the area of circular economy. There's all sorts, there's a very good Green Construction Board route map for zero avoidable waste in construction that's available on our website. Lots going on in this area. Could do a whole 40 minutes on this topic as well. Next slide, please. So we've established that sustainability is many different strands, many different interpretations. It's not new, but it is new at the same time. It's now affecting, it's come from the niche to your company, your kids' schools, everything else. So my job as the CPA Sustainability Policy Advisor is to make sense as much as I can of all of this that's going on. You know, can I sort of try and give you a framework that makes sense, and so you're not chasing every single little initiative and not linking them together, because in the end of the day they're all clustering. You know, you're either clustering on net zero and climate, or resources and circular economy, or reporting. So there are clusters, and that's the simplest way to deal with this. So I provide an early warning system to our members on the thinking emerging from government on sustainability topics, what direction those policies are heading in. So therefore, it's like a forecasting role. I can tell you those things. You're all very different size companies, different sectors. So you have to then say, oh, well, that's not relevant to us. We're not energy intensive. Or, gosh, we have a huge waste stream, so we better get involved in ideas of reuse or take back schemes. Or perhaps you're very chemically oriented, and therefore those issues will impact you if you can't get hold of your key chemicals. So it's a forecasting role. Then another key area of what I do is to inform members of calls for evidence from government, consultations, research projects, and I collate and discuss with members an industry position. And I will sometimes, like at the moment, we have a call for evidence on scope 3 reporting as it relates to these new international finance sustainability standards. So I will be, I've sent that out to members. I'm convening a meeting for members with DESNES on Tuesday, the 5th of December, for an hour and a half to have a discussion with them about the topic. And then I will write a CPA response for that call for evidence, which is due in at midnight on the 13th of December. Those of you in sectors may be doing similar. So I provide a voice, one of many voices from the construction product sector back to government. I also participate in some standards development with BSI, particularly the CEN TC 350 standards and the evolution of the Environmental Product Declaration standard, which is EN 15804. Huge amount of issues to do with EPD. Again, that could be another whole webinar. There is, the focus used to be very much on what government was doing, but now there are lots of non-government market initiatives, lots of coalitions of industry who are developing pieces of work that because they feel government's not going fast enough, so they want to develop a way to ensure they are delivering low carbon infrastructure projects or low carbon commercial projects. So they're developing lots of what they call standards, which have now arrived at the point that they now have to align with the actual BSI, CEN or ISO standards. I do engage with the wider construction community, other professional bodies and academia, but there is only me, so, and there is only 24 hours in the day, so I do that as time allows. And to try and help with yourselves and external, those who want to know about construction products, I produce briefing papers. Often I commission the real experts to write those briefing papers. They're very short, they're 2 to 4 pages to explain a topic, and they are on our website. We also have net zero, a decarbonisation directory to signpost to what members are doing. I quite regularly now get asked about what the construction product sector is doing on topic X. But as I mentioned, there are 24,000 companies, so I'm not doing a survey. So it's very much, can we signpost to what you're doing? And then I also, just to mention it, there is something called the Green Construction Board, which works with government, and I support the chair of that, David Pinder, and I'm the joint secretariat of it with the Department of Business and Trade. And that provides thought leadership on sustainability and net zero to government and the Construction Leadership Council. So next slide, please. Almost through. So we have a CPA Sustainability Policy Group, existed for 20 years, now has over 200 participating people who come from our companies and trade associations. Different sectors are interested in different themes and topics. Increasingly, the people who participate are at very different stages in their sustainability journey. Some are at the start, some are intermediate, want to know a bit more, others are advanced, and we might be into the deep discussions on how to respond to a call for evidence. The group meets regularly. When pre-COVID, it was quarterly. Now it's online, so we can meet more regularly and on a range of topics, and they now tend to be single issue topics, and therefore that enables us to deal with the different knowledge levels. So for instance, on scope 3, I've mentioned a detailed discussion on the 5th, but I've also just arranged with Crown Commercial Service that they will do a sort of introduction to scopes 1, 2 and 3 reporting on the 23rd of January. And then, because it's such a huge agenda, we do have subgroups that we set up as necessary. So we have one on packaging and the extended producer responsibility at the present time, which is led by Sarah Peake from Seeker and Tim Cowling from Tarmac. And we also have initiated an SME group, which is the chair of which is Andrew Roberts from Polyroof. So we're a community of sustainability professionals who sort of help each other out. So I'll email someone and say, hey, Sarah, what's happening on I don't understand it, or they will do that back to me. So it's very much a community. Next slide, please. And these are the current issues we're dealing with. Where, as I mentioned, the mass confusion over company carbon reporting, scopes 1, 2, 3 compared to product LCA, EPD reporting, and asset whole life carbon reporting. Lots of teasing out of all of that. We are feeding into the many government projects on carbon accounting. It would actually be cheaper if government just employed someone who knew the topic rather than do all these consultancy projects out to people who don't know the topic, but that's a view. And that's all around these new investment standards and the carbon border adjustment mechanism. The carbon labelling of products we're keeping a very engaged view on, because we are intermediate products and we really need to assess a product's role in delivering a low carbon structure. The clients and contractors are now looking at whole life carbon assessment, and I am expecting government to start to, as many cities do, start to ask for a whole life carbon assessment. And for manufacturers, that means they're asking you for EPD information about your products. We have a lot of briefing papers on EPD, which are either for yourselves or the wider construction community. Industrial decarbonisation, we want from government, as you hear continually, we want a robust and long-term industrial strategy that doesn't flip-flop all over the place. Companies need to invest. They can't do it on their own. There does need to be government involvement in that, and we're seeing in the United States, the US Inflation Reduction Act is bringing huge amounts of money to invest in onshoring industrial sectors, and in the process to transition them to clean energy. We want to see the same in the UK. Packaging and extended producer responsibility, another bit of a mess from government. We want clarity on the detail, but also we don't think our sector should be in scope for household waste definition. Next year, already we're seeing the whole question of circular economy very much increasing, and there's more and more discussion about reuse, remanufacture, take-back schemes, material passports. We have at the bigger regulatory level, the revised EU construction products regulation will start to include various EPD indicators in the declaration of performance. So we work through Construction Products Europe on that topic. So I'm confident they're keeping our back, or whatever that phrase is. Obviously, digitalization of environmental product data is part of the general digitalization sort of trend. And then we also look at procurement asks. We do find quite a lot of ESG questionnaires don't show a very deep understanding of the questions they're asking. And finally, for SMEs, we're trying to find a way to help them negotiate the baffling array of sustainability advice and identify the business benefits. Next slide, please. I think I'm not going to go through this. You can see that if you pick up the agenda. But basically, given everything I've said, what are you in your company or sector doing on net zero and sustainability? Next slide, please. So my point being that sustainability is not the add-on nice to have. It's no longer just compliance and a bit of, an irritant and a burden. It is now affecting your markets, your ability to win contracts, also just your sheer costs. Energy is a huge cost. So if you can look at how you're reducing your energy, you're reducing your costs. If you're looking at new supplies of energy, they might be cheaper. They might not, but they might be cheaper. So all of these things are costs and benefits. So not just within your actual manufacturing process, but affecting increasingly and more so your markets and your role in the new way of functioning as we transition to net zero. So sustainability is now within your business strategy, and it's part of risks, opportunity, and resilience. Next slide, please. Thank you. Thank you for listening. I'm sure I've probably increased the bafflement even more so, but our role is to try and bring clarity to a massive agenda, which I know from what many of you say to me is you're struggling with as much as I am. Thank you very much.
What are the ISO standards for EPDs, please? Any example of the non-ISO standards for EPDs?
Yes. The specific answer to that question is ISO 21930. Normally, we use the CEN, the European standard, EN 15804 plus A2, which is its amendment in 2019. those two standards are aligned through something called the Vienna Convention. So when one updates, when the other updates, it seeks to be informed by they inform each other. In fact, often it's the same people on those groups. But you would, unless you're from, I did see some folk were from not the UK or Europe, perhaps, on the call. So ISO would be 21930. But EN 15804, which is the methodology for measuring and reporting environmental impact, and the certificate, if you like, or the report is an environmental product declaration, is now very much globally accepted. So I would tend to go for that one.
Thank you, Jane. Another question. Does the CPA have any view on when the future OHMS standard consultation may be announced?
Well, this has been promised for some months now. Originally, it was sort of promised in the autumn. I do know it has gone around the different departments. Usually there's a lead department that produces something, and then it goes around the other departments for sign off, and then it sort of goes into Treasury and number 10. So that is where it sits at the moment. It will be a future homes and future building standard. It's sort of one standard, but divided into two, I think. Well, last I knew, of course, things can go into number 10 and never come out. So it is soon. Whether it will be before Christmas, I don't know. There may be something in the autumn statement, which I think starts at 12:30, which might mention it. Not sure.
Thanks, Jane. Are there any fundings for small and medium-sized companies in the UK to get help with net zero?
Funding for them. There's loads of advice out there. You can go to the UK Business Hub to get advice. There isn't. It's not the way the UK government works. They don't sort of provide people for free who can come and help on net zero. So, but there's the Carbon Trust. As I say, the Business Hub, I think, has 4 carbon calculators which you could use. The Crown Commercial Service does, I think it's every 2 weeks, does free online training on scopes 1, 2, and 3 reporting. And the thing is that if you are reporting, it means you're assessing, you're identifying those parts of your operation, your manufacturing process, your offices, your transport. It talks about that you need to think about those. You need to identify and locate the numbers you have for those energy uses or transport uses or water usage, and then how you report. So when people use the shorthand of scopes 1, 2, and 3 reporting, actually, if you join that free webinar for the Crown Commercial Service or join up for their bespoke version for us on the 23rd of January, then it will help you identify what to look at. There's also other things called materiality. It's a process to identify what's relevant to you, but there isn't somebody who just comes along and comes into your business and helps you for free. No.
Thanks, Jane. The time is up, but I think we have time for just one last question. What's your opinion on the Prime Minister's recent rollback of key green targets? It seems some of it is more realistic, but some of it creates more uncertainty as well.
It was a curious one, the Prime Minister's talk. It was much leaked, and there was much clamour and comment before it came out. So how much of a rollback was it, is the question. Because if you look, for instance, at the electric car issue, where the 100% electric well, it was a ban on diesel and petrol car sales by 2030 has been rolled back to 2035. But the market mechanism in place still requires it to be 80% ban on the sale of petrol and diesel cars by 2030, or the other way around, if you see what I mean. And the purpose of that was, if we kept to the 2030 target, that there isn't the infrastructure, the charging infrastructure in place. We haven't got our battery situation sorted out. If to do 2030, we could only achieve it by mass import of Chinese electric cars, which would undermine any UK manufacturers, and it would mean that the second-hand market for electric cars would also then be Chinese. So, to some extent, it was much more realistic to just shift the regulatory ban at the bottom, but there's still the ambition at the top. And we saw that with a lot of things, actually, that it was the regulatory ban at the bottom that was shifted or taken away, but the ambition at the top and the targets remain the same. So the Climate Change Act has not been rolled back. The 2030 target has not been rolled back. Even most of the heat in buildings framework exists. Even the 600,000 heat pumps by 2028, which many people think is just completely unlikely. Again, it's that difference between ambitions, targets, policies, incentives, and regulation. And what he tended to do was, as I say, take the regulation away at the bottom, but keep the ambition at the top. So some things, the incentives doubled, but also it did. So I'm not as desperate about it as a lot of the media rhetoric was. Obviously, the what was it, EPC C by 2025 for private rented homes. I don't see how that would have been funded anyway. So it is that issue. Is it appropriate to have a regulation that's just not going to happen? And is that the best way to go about things? So that's possibly not the reply that you expected, but I'm happy to engage with people on that. But it is now a done deal. And I always think at the present time, you're best to use your energy to go forward.
Thank you very much, Jane, and thanks everyone for joining this webinar today, and we hope you found it interesting. If you have any further questions or comments, please email me or Jane. If you have questions on membership, email me. This webinar will be on the CPA website next week, together with Jane's slides. And thank you very much, everyone, and have a nice rest of the day.
Thank you very much.